A Senate inquiry into human rights violations in Iran will hold its first public hearing in Canberra tomorrow. It's as the situation in the Middle Eastern country continues to deteriorate rapidly. Hundreds have been killed, including at least 40 children, as protesters refuse to back down following the horrific death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini back in September. She was detained for wearing her headscarf the wrong way. So far, it's believed 15,000 people have been arrested. The death sentence has already been handed down. Very few people see the inside of an Iranian jail cell and get to tell their tale. Kylie Moore-Gilbert spent over 800 days behind bars in Tehran and has been watching events unfold over the past few months closely. She joins me now. Kylie, thank you, as always, so much for coming on. Now, we last spoke before this uprising. What's been your reaction?
I mean, my response has been the same as so many people, which is just shock and horror at the level of brutality and violence that the Iranian regime is, doing against their own people there on the streets in Iran. We've entered the third month now of these protests and they don't show any sign of abating, and the regime's violence has just been ramped up more and more with the passage of time. And, I'm in awe of the bravery of Iranian women, Iranian children and the Iranian people in standing up against this horrific crackdown and advocating for their rights. But it's really, really worrying and shocking, particularly now that people are starting to get sentenced to death for protesting.
Yeah, how does it make you feel when you see that, knowing that you were in the position a lot of people over there are in now, at the mercy of a regime that doesn't appear to have any conscience whatsoever?
It doesn't surprise me that they've responded in this way. From my own experience, I saw firsthand the level of cruelty and brutality and the extent to which this regime is prepared to hold on to power at all costs. But it is very confronting for me. I do have friends who are in prison in Iran still at this moment. It has brought home, a lot of my own memories from the time I spent there.
That must be absolutely horrific. Given all of that, you must be so mind blown by the fact that these protests are continuing, that people are refusing to back down.
I am utterly blown away by it. There are so many commentators and Western experts and the like who didn't give this uprising much time at all. They said, oh, I'll give it a few weeks and it'll blow over, just like all of the other protest movements we've seen before. And, in previous occasions, Iranians have gone back into their homes through fear of, being killed in the streets or being arrested and thrown into prison and given a death sentence. But this time, it's just different. The more people that are killed, the more of their fellow citizens mass on the streets in protest at that killing, particularly young children and women, because we've seen more than 50 children, some of them even primary school age, who've been killed, as well as a large number of women, and even reports of systemic rape in prisons of female protesters as well. So this seems to enrage the population further and actually drive more onto the streets rather than, making them fearful and keeping them in their homes.
Now, this has been a regime that has carried out acts of evil and been horrific for a long period of time. Why now? Why do you think there's been a line drawn in the sand?
That's a really good question. And, as we've seen in other revolutions throughout the world, sometimes you only need a spark, or you need, a straw that breaks the camel's back. And in this case, it was the senseless killing of Mahsa Amini, who was just a young woman, a regular person. And I think, it really was something that had been building up for a number of years, triggered by all sorts of grievances, but really a broad desire for this regime to go, and for these really restrictive and nonsensical, restrictions that have been placed on their day-to-day lives to be removed. People just want to live in peace and freedom and not have the government tell them what to do, down to the level of what they should be wearing.
It's unimaginable, particularly for us here in the West, which leads me to the global response. Has it been good enough?
Australia, I think, has really lagged behind our Western fellow democratic nations in actually taking meaningful action to sanction Iran and Iranian officials over this crackdown, to list the IRGC as a terror organisation, to, summon the Iranian ambassador and do more than just expressing empty condemnations and empty support for human rights in general. Other countries like Canada, Germany, the US have done so much more than Australia on this. And there is a lot more that the Australian government could do if it chose, if it wanted to actually back up its support for human rights with more than words and actually take some meaningful action.
This one surprises me. Why do you think they are not? And particularly a Labor government who loves a cause, to be honest, and there's honestly not one thing that I can think of that should be stopping them here.
Yeah, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. It's not that we have extensive economic ties to Iran or trade ties that need to be protected or something. I really don't understand it, particularly given our quite strong support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. The Iranians are fighting for the exact same values that the Ukrainians are fighting for: democracy, freedom. And it's in Australia's manifest interest to remove this brutal dictatorship from the Middle East. They are sponsoring terrorism abroad. They're interfering in other countries' internal affairs. They're participating in the war in Syria, for example. They're funding terror groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. They're intervening in Yemen. It's not our interest to keep this regime in place. And I think that we should take a much stronger position on Iran. We don't really have much to lose in doing so. So I'm really unsure as to why the government is so hesitant to do anything. There's been talk of us not wanting to upset diplomatic relations with Iran because our embassy performs an important role in the region for our allies who might not have relations with Iran as well as for us. But again, I don't think that's a justifiable reason. I think we should back our own values on this and stand up for the people of Iran and their human rights.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. We can't cite our values and our morals as a justification for standing up against some regimes, but not others. You really can't pick and choose. We'll watch with interest how this goes tomorrow, this Senate inquiry. Kylie Moore-Gilbert, thank you so much for your time. You've written an incredible book as well. People can find that online about your experience in an Iranian jail.
Thanks for having me on, Erin.